Hello friends, welcome to the next episode of DotVVM Minutes. It has been quite a while since the last episode where I was showing how to modernize your web forms application using DotVVM. We installed .vvm in the existing application and slowly started rewriting individual pages and then upgraded the project to the .NET Core. And today I would like to get back to the postback handlers, which is a very useful feature in .vvm where you can extend the behavior of postbacks, which are triggered by buttons or other components. And you can write basically a generic behavior that you can then apply on various places in your application. So let's begin. So this scenario I will be showing today comes actually from our actual users who asked us on a support email how to make a postback handler that is triggered based on some condition. And basically what the user needed is that he has an application where you can select slides, and here in this area some interactive content loads. I'm just writing slide 2, slide 3 here, but there is some load action. So when you change something in this combo box, then some content, a postback is made and some content will appear in this place. But if the user is writing a command, so hello.vvm, and then chooses to go to a next slide, the comment will disappear and the user might lose the changes before the comment is posted. So, so when I click here, you can see that the requested behavior is to display a modal dialog and ask the user if he wants to leave the page and discard the changes or if he wants to stay on this page. So that's it. But if there is no comment, if there is nothing in this field, I can just go to another slide without any restriction. So basically, I want to create a postback handler and enable it only when there is some condition. So where, for example, where this field has some actual value. So now the postback handler is active and now it won't be active. So that's what we are trying to accomplish. And let's dig in the code. So first I will just go through the code of the entire page, and then I will show you how to write a generic postback handler that can display a modal dialog and that can be switched on or off based on some condition. So this is our page. If I go to the master page, it's very simple. I'm just using Bootstrap CSS, not the commercial product Bootstrap for .vvm, but just the CSS. And I'm also including a script for my postback handler. It's a script I have written, so I'm including it in master page, so I can use the postback handler anywhere I actually want. And in the body, there's nothing else, just a Bootstrap container, which will make sure that the content of the page is centered the middle of the screen. In my default page, I have a row with 2 columns, and the first column is the left part, so this is the actual slide and the selector, the combo box. So this is my content of the slide. As you can see, it's just a mock-up. I'm just displaying the current slide ID. And there is a combo box which I'm using to jump between the slides. So as a data source, I have a collection of the slides. I'm displaying slide and number of the slide and writing the selected value into selected slide ID. Now there is the difference. You can have selected a different slide than is currently displayed. So I'm not switching just current slide ID. I'm switching other property. Basically, this is a better name would be requested slide ID, because if there is a command, the slide won't change. There will still be the old slide loaded until I get rid of the command. And when the selection is changed, I'm calling my function on the server. And this is, as I said, this is just a mockup. So I'm just switching the current slide ID to the selected slide ID, and I'm resetting the comment because the point of this sample is to only allow the change if the comment box is empty, because it gets reset when you navigate to other slides. Here I'm using my postback handler. So I have created unsaved changes notice postback handler. And here I have a binding which determines whether the postback handler should be displayed or not. Yeah, so this is a condition. It should return Boolean, so it returns true or false. And basically, the only thing I need to do is to determine if there are unsaved changes or not. So if comment text is longer than 0 characters, that means there is a comment in the comment section. So I have to ask the user. Otherwise, I just pass through and make the postback. And here I have the very simple comment section. So post your comment, text box control, which is multi-line, and the button. And this doesn't do anything because I don't have any database or anything else here. It's just a mockup. So, but I would save the comment on this place and reset the comment text to an empty string. Yeah. So that's what I need to do. Now let's go to the postback handler. But before, I will just repeat what postback handlers do. So any control in .vvm can specify as an inner element this collection. It's called postback.handlers, and it's basically an attached property, attached collection. And in this collection, you can specify multiple, one or more postback handlers. Postback handler is basically an interceptor for postback. So whenever the control makes a command binding, and this applies to commands and also to static commands. So it doesn't matter if this is command or static command. Then the postback handlers are invoked, and they can do something with the postback. They can delay it, or they can cancel it, or they can wait for the result and do something with the result. Yeah, so there's a lot of flexibility. Basically, the postback handler gets a callback, and it can decide if it will call it, and also it can wait for the result. And the postback handler is a C# class which derives from postback handler, which is a class somewhere in .vvm namespace. And there are a few things you will need to do. The first is you need to override the client handler name. Every postback handler has some name in the JavaScript. So basically, this way you are just telling .vvm, okay, this postback handler, which is this C# class, has this name on the client side. Yeah, because there are no namespaces, things like that. So the name is a little bit different. So that's it. And then I'm declaring .vvm properties. It's same as in normal user controls. So there's a code snippet for that. So you can say .prop and press tab, and it will expand this code snippet. So that's what I have done. So I have declared the title property with some default values. So this card changes. This is the title of the modal dialog. Then there's a message. So this is the question we will be asking the user. And as you can see, also there is some reasonable default, but you can just change it in the markup. So you can say message equals something. Yeah. So it can be done from the markup. And there is the continue button text and cancel button text, because you also want to be able to change the text on the buttons. So that's it. And then the last property is has unsaved changes binding. And the suffix binding, it indicates that a binding is expected in this property. It wouldn't do anything reasonable if there is just hard-coded value. So it has to be binding. I have also used the markup options, and I'm saying do not allow hard-coded values. Yeah? And there is also required true, so which means that without this property, you will get an error. So if I wouldn't specify this, the Visual Studio extension should underscore this, that there is no property. It works only in the commercial edition of DotVVM for Visual Studio. If you have the free edition, you will get the error when you try to load the page. In the paid edition, you will get the green squiggles. So this is how you basically enable or disable the behavior, or you can just do any other action based on this. The last thing every postback handler must do is to return a dictionary of property values that will be passed as an options to the client-side part. So basically, I take all those properties and I'm calling getValueRaw because it will behave correctly no matter if there is a binding or if there is a hard-coded value in the property. So this will work with both. So that's it. And these are the names I will be using in JavaScript. So this is a list of properties that we are passing to the JavaScript part of the postback handler. And the second part of the binding handler is this. So basically, I'm registering a postback handler. Notice that this name, that's the client handler name. So this must match to this. And basically, every postback handler is a function. And when it gets invoked, it needs to return an object with execute function. This is a little weird way, but the problem is that the postback handlers must be reusable. So basically, we need a factory for postback handlers because every postback handler instance can have different options. So basically, this is a factory method, and it returns an object with execute function, and you have the options right here. So what does the execute method? It's the only method in the postback handler. So what does it do? Basically, it will get a callback, which will do the actual postback. If you call it, the postback will proceed and it will make the communication with the server. And because you might do something quite long before you want to proceed the postback, that's why we are returning a promise. Yeah. So you can have some async code before you actually proceed to the postback. That's why this is wrapped as a promise. So basically, the execute is function which returns a promise. And if you haven't been working with promises in JavaScript, it's quite similar as a tasks in .NET, in C#, or maybe to be more precise, it's similar like task completion source. So it's some code and it can do a lot of async stuff. And when it's ready, when you have the actual value, you can say, okay, now I have the value, and the task, which is behind the task completion source, it will just be completed. So that's the same thing as a promise. So I'm returning a promise, and anyone who will try to read the value from the promise, it won't work because there's no value yet. But the promise will start evaluating this function, and when you call resolve or reject, which are delegates, these are functions. So when you have the value, you will just call resolve, and when it fails, you can call reject. Yeah. So basically, it will run this function asynchronously, and when you call resolve or reject, the promise will be completed. And you can chain things on this promise, so you can say the promise then, and you can tell another callbacks which will be triggered whenever the promise is completed. Yeah, and that's what we are doing just here. So we are just calling the callback, which returns another promise, and after it proceeds, because this is basically the rest of the postback handler pipeline, then we will resolve our promise. It can continue. Okay, so let's go here. We have the options and we have has unsafe changes binding. And it's a binding expression which indicates whether the dialog should appear or not. So I will call ko unwrap, which is a Knockout.js function that will make sure this is unwrapped. So if it's a knockout observable, which this is because it's a binding, so it will unwrap the observable and get the actual value. And if there are some changes, we will display a modal dialog. I will get back to it soon. And if not, I'm just calling the internal callback. And after the callback is finished, I will call resolve or reject. The then method has two parameters. First is a successful callback, and second is a callback in case of error. So that's exactly what I want to do. I want just chain this promise to the callback promise. Yeah, so whenever the callback returns, I will also return. And if the callback fails, I will also fail my promise. Yeah, so this is chained. And you can have more postback handlers chained in the pipeline. So that's why this is so this is chained in this way, because you can nest these things together to a very long chain. Okay, so this is very easy. If there are no unsafe changes, if this returns false, I will just do the postback. And if there are changes, I have created a helper method show bootstrap model, and it will display a dialog and it will wait for the action of the user. The user can just cancel the dialog, or the user can click the OK button. And because I cannot wait actually in JavaScript, because JavaScript is single-threaded, I can also work with promises. So even this function returns a promise. So I'm displaying a dialog, and after the dialog is completed, after it's closed, no matter if the user clicked OK or cancel, when the dialog disappears, the promise either resolves or rejects. If it resolves, I will proceed with the postback, because the promise will resolve if the user clicks OK. And if the promise doesn't resolve, if it rejects with an error, I will just reject the postback. Let's dig in this function to see what happened. And there is just one note. If you are rejecting promise from a postback handler, you should return an object where type equals handler. There can be a message, and you should also return the handler. Okay, so let's dig in the show bootstrap modal function. It's a function I've created, and it also returns a promise. So because it's async. This function is async. So I will just display the dialog. That's the first thing I can do synchronously, just create some HTML elements in the page. And then I'm waiting for some event. If the user clicks on the OK button, then I will resolve the promise. And if the user hides the dialog, and there can be multiple ways how to hide it. There is the cross icon in the top right corner. There's also the bootstrap modal dialog also responds to the escape key. So there's multiple ways how to close the dialog. So anyway the user closes the dialog, I will catch the event and reject the promise. So in a jQuery, it's pretty easy to create a modal dialog. You can just write this. This is basically a copy paste from the Bootstrap documentation, and jQuery will parse this HTML, and it will build the hierarchy of HTML elements. And then I can find H5 element, which is the title of the modal dialog, and I'm just passing title in it. There is also a modal body with the question, so I'm passing the message from the options. And then I'm looking for the buttons, for the primary and secondary buttons, and I'm using continue and cancel button text. Yeah, so basically I take the property values from the options and update this HTML so it will match. And if the user tries to, and by user I mean developer, if the developer will try to use some characters which are not safe in HTML, like the angle brackets, it doesn't matter because I am setting the text by using jQuery, not by just concatenating the value here, which would be dangerous because if there's some piece of script, it would just evaluate. So this is safer, yes, to look in the generated elements and set the text values. And then I need to handle the events. So first is the primary button, which is the OK button. So if the user clicks on this button, I'm calling this function. And it does a couple of things. The first, I will just note that dialog was confirmed. So by default, it's declared to false. I will set it to true. And then I will resolve the promise. So now if anybody was waiting for the end of the promise with the then function, then his callback will be just called. So this will just resolve the promise. And I will also hide the modal dialog. In jQuery, you can use the modal function on this. It's basically a Bootstrap plugin. Yeah, so I will initialize this as a Bootstrap modal dialog, and then I can command it using the modal function on this. And I'm also catching an event hidden.bs.modal, which is triggered when the dialog is hiding. So this modal.modal hide, it will also trigger this event. And when it's hidden, I will just remove it from the page completely. I don't want these elements to have in the page. And if the dialog wasn't confirmed, I will call reject. If it was confirmed, I will do nothing because the promise has been already resolved. Yeah, so I don't need to do anything. Yeah. And if the user just presses escape, this will never fire, but this will fire, and was confirmed is false, so I will reject the promise. And so these are handlers, and still I haven't added the dialog in the page, so I'm appending it at the end of the body element, so it will be on top of everything. And I'm showing the modal dialog, which basically I can do with this call. So I'm taking the modal element and initialize modal dialog from Bootstrap by using this. If you don't want to use Bootstrap, it would be quite similar. You will need to generate some other hierarchy of divs and style it with some appropriate CSS. And then you will need to watch for events on buttons. So basically you will have some OK and cancel button in the dialog. So in case the OK button is clicked, you need to resolve the promise. If the dialog is just cancelled using any way, not only button, but also the escape key and anything else, you just need to reject the promise if it wasn't resolved earlier. So that's it. And if you call this function, it will prepare and show the dialog, and it will return the promise. And the promise is not yet resolved because the dialog is still visible. But when the user will do some action with the dialog, either confirms or cancels, then the promise will either resolve or reject, and you can apply some other behavior after the promise. So that's exactly what I'm doing here. So basically, I'm just passing these 4 parameters to the promise, and then after it's resolved, I will either proceed with the original postback, or I will reject the promise from the postback handler. And the last thing you need to do is to register the postback handler. So if I go to .vvm startup, I'm registering postback handler as it was a normal code-only control. The principle is the same. So I'm registering this postback handler under the CC prefix. So I can use it here, CC unsafe changes postback handler. And I need to also register the script. So that's what I'm doing here. So config resource register unsafe changes notice. This is the name of the resource. And there's a path to the resource, and it has dependencies. I'm using jQuery and I'm using .vvm because I'm waiting for the init method and I'm registering a postback handler into .vvm global object. So I need this script to be run after .vvm is actually included in the page. So that's why I'm using these dependencies right here. There's a link under the video where you can download the sample project and play with that. So what we have been doing is we have created a postback handler which is triggered when you change a selection in this combo box field. And if you choose anything, it will either proceed with the postback, or if there's some text in this field, it will prevent the postback and display a dialog. Now the promise, which I've been talking about, is in progress. And when I click this button, it will get resolved. So the postback will happen and we will switch the slide. Or if I click on stay here, nothing changes, and I see the debug message postback interrupted. Yeah, so this is what you will see only in the debug mode, because .vvm node informs you that there was a postback which was rejected. Yeah, so this is what we have created, and it works thanks to the postback handlers. By the way, right now we are in progress of redesigning and reviewing the postback pipeline, and in .vvm 3.0 there will be a new postback pipeline, or it's still the same old one, but with a lot of significant changes. We have improved the error handling, we have fixed some issues in it, and we will also create a generic TypeScript version of postback handler, which should be a little bit easier to implement than this postback handler I have right here, because in JavaScript you cannot use all the nice language features, or if you want to use them, you would need to use some Babel or Rollup or some other tool to convert them to be compatible with all browsers. With TypeScript, it's also, you can use high-level language features like async await keywords, and then TypeScript compiler will transpile this to old version of JavaScript which the browsers actually understand. So this is written in a way I wouldn't need transpiler at all, because this should work also in old versions of Internet Explorer. But if you want the syntax to be a little bit nicer, you can use TypeScript for this. That's everything I have today, and stay tuned, follow us on YouTube, and see you in the next episode of .vvm Minutes. Thank you.